is a very important tool to ensure that patients have access to the best available care, and particularly relevant in an area where EuropaBio is quite active, which is advanced therapy and medicines for rare diseases. You know that cell and gene therapies, also know it's what we call ATMPs, advanced therapy medicinal products, require highly specialized physicians and hospitals working in networks of reference centers. And for rare diseases where we have a very limited number of patients, it's quite impossible to have in each member state a treatment center which is dedicated to each disease. That's why, you know, a well-functioning EU cross-border healthcare legislation is key to ensure that patients have access to specialized treatments and novel therapies when they are not available in their home country. You certainly know also that EuropaBio has recently participated to the public consultation on the evaluation of patient rights in cross-border healthcare, and has identified several challenges for accessing care abroad and has made several recommendations for improvement. But today, to discuss this topic, I'm very, very honored to have gathered a very good expert panel, and I would like to introduce to you some of the speakers we're going to have this afternoon. First, Mr. Martin Dorazil, who is the Deputy Head of Unit Digital Health at DG Health from the European Commission. Then we have Mrs. Irina Grossenbauer, Region Europe Patient Access Director at Novartis in Rare Diseases. We will have also Mr. Brieux Van Damme, who is the Director General of RISIV INAMI, the National Institute for Health and Insurance in Belgium. We will be joined later afterwards by MEP Tomislav Sokol, who is an expert on that topic. And finally, in our panel, we have also Mr. Dirk van der Meen-Brugge, who is Vice President, Medical Affairs, Lead Rare Diseases International Development Market with Pfizer. And this panel is going to react to our main presentation, and I'm also to introduce to you Diana Popova, who is the Executive Committee member of the European Alliance for Neuromuscular Disorder Association, but also EuPATI Patient Engagement Training Coordinator, which is a big topic when it comes to. And Diana will give us a keynote introduction today. But before I move to this part, I will just give you a few housekeeping rules. Of course, you know, we are looking for a very active attendance, and you can ask all your questions in the Q&A box. If you have comments to share with all participants, please use the chat box. And I just want to remind you that the event is recorded and that slides will be available after the event, so no need to take. I wanted also to highlight, you know, the possibility, of course, to be active on social media, on LinkedIn, Twitter, and you can see on the slide that I'm showing, you know, the address to use to do this. And the last element that I would like to share with you is that we're going to have a live polling and with question on Slido. And to do this, you can join, of course, slido.com. The password to use is @ATMP. And the question we would like to bring to the audience is, what are the key barriers in the implementation of the cross-border healthcare legislation? So please be as active as possible. And I just wanted to mention also that MEP Sokol is going to join us a bit later because he's in a meeting, but we hope he's going to be able to join us in the coming minutes. So now I would like to leave the floor after this short introduction to Jana. And Jana is going to give us a little overview on the EU cross-border access to advanced treatment. Is this a reality or a goal for the future? And what is the value of treatment for rare disease patients in the EU? Jana, I leave you the floor. And after this, I hope we're going to have a very interesting panel discussion. Thank you for that. And let's look at your main points, Jana.
Thank you very much, Bernard. And Hello, everyone from my side as well. My name is Zhana Popova, and I'm from Bulgaria. I'm really happy to be part of this interesting webinar, and I would like to thank EuropaBio for organizing this event. And I hope that we're going to have very fruitful discussion together. But before we focus on the main topic of my presentation, let me briefly introduce myself. Next slide, please. So I'm 30 years old and I live in Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria. I'm a patient with spinal muscular atrophy and I was diagnosed in 1992. I also have been active as a patient advocate since 2006. I'm a member of the Bulgarian Association for Neuromuscular Diseases and an executive committee member of the European Alliance of Neuromuscular Disorders Associations. I also used to be a member of the European Patients Forum Youth Group and the EPF board from 2018 to 2021. I also have this wonderful award of Aurudis Black Belt in the category of Young Patient Advocate, and in 2021 I became EuPATI Fellow, and currently I'm working as the EuPATI Patient Engagement Training Coordinator. I'm interested in all aspects of patient advocacy and especially equal rights and opportunities for adult people living not only with SMA but also with other rare conditions and especially the access to cross-border healthcare. That's why I would like to focus my presentation on the patient perspective in the cross-border healthcare as a way to increase patient empowerment in general. But before that, I would like to share a few words about the EuPATI. Next slide, please. The European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, or EuPATI, which is the abbreviation, is a multi-stakeholder public-private partnership. EuPATI provides scientifically reliable and comprehensive information to patients and the general public on the medicine research and development processes. EuPATI is unique in its structure because it is focused on the patient expertise and provides education on different methods. For example, how to increase the patient engagement among different stakeholders and how to establish meaningful collaboration with them. We believe that the key factor to increase the patient empowerment is to provide professional education about the principles of patient expertise. That's why our mission is to establish education and training for patients and patients' representatives and to enable them to be valuable contributors in the R&D processes. Our trainings are specially adapted to patient needs and they present the different processes of research and development. EuPATI main activities are Patient Expert Training Program, the launch of the online toolbox which consists of different terms in the field of research and development, the EuPATI national platforms in different countries and Europe, and the stakeholders training in patient engagement for the industry and academia. The Patient Expert Training Program is a unique opportunity offering patients and patient representatives expert-level training in medicine research development. Today, we are very happy to have more than 200 patient experts who have graduated in this training and have acquired knowledge to make meaningful contribution in high-level processes of medicine research and development. Also, we focused a lot on the topic about cross-border healthcare. We are very happy to share that in July we had a webinar dedicated to this topic and we keep it in our radar in order to make it meaningful and understandable for patients coming from different disease areas. Next slide, please. Now, speaking about cross-border healthcare, we really need to speak about also the legislation frame and how it could be implemented. The truth is that there are a couple of important documents that we need to take into consideration when we talk about cross-border healthcare. One of them is the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And here you can see Article 168 from this document. According to it, a high level of human health protection shall be ensured in the definition and implementation of all Union policies and activities. This means that Union action which shall complement national policies shall be different towards improving public health, preventing physical and mental illness and disease and obviating sources of danger to physical and mental health. The Union also shall complement the Member States' action in reducing drugs-related health-related damages, including information and prevention. This means that every action related to ensure and protect quality health care should be encouraged and implemented in the best possible way. And this is extremely important when we talk about people coming from rare diseases field. But how this could happen? Next slide, please. This is in the scope of the regulation of the same treaty and functioning of the European Union. And according to this Article 5, the European Parliament and the Council, acting in accordance with the ordinary legislative procedures and after consulting the Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions, may also adopt incentive measures designed to protect and improve human health and in particular to combat the major cross-border health scourges, measures concerning monitoring, early warning and combating serious cross-border threats to health, and measures which have as their direct object the protection of public health regarding tobacco and the abuse of alcohol, excluding any harmonizations of the law and regulations. And at the same document we have the Article 6, which proposed that the Council, on a proposal from the Commission, may also adopt recommendations for the purposes set out in the article. And finally, but definitely not at least, we need to take into consideration this article and we need to try to implement it in our local laws and our local areas, because the measures referred to here in paragraph 4a shall not affect national provisions of the nation or medical use of organs and blood. And with all that being said, we can understand the importance of cross-border healthcare, but what we need to focus is how this could be properly implemented and developed on national journey and national level, because we have the legislation frame, but how this could happen in national level. Next slide, please. That's why it is important to think about the historical background of this initiative and how it has been developed through the years in order that we reach the current stage today. European initiatives in the field of cross-border healthcare start with the High-Level Pharmaceutical Forum on Pricing and Reimbursement in 2006 from 2008. The main purpose of it is to identify innovative medicines with significant added therapeutic value and to attain both industrial and public health sector goals. We also have the so popular regulation from 2004 on the coordination of social security system and its implementation in S2 pathway. This regulation strengthens cooperation between European countries, social security institutions, and improves the methods that they use to share information with one another. The main purpose is to provide opportunities to citizens to exercise their right to move freely in the European Union for study, leisure, or for professional reasons, and guarantee that they don't have disadvantage in terms of social security or quality of health care. And then we move to 2011 when we have the so popular Directive on the Rights in Cross-Border Healthcare. We promote cooperation between member states on healthcare matters, and on later stage we also have this directive whose main purpose is to enhance the collaboration between different member states and to provide easier access to cross-border healthcare and quality of treatment abroad. That's why we have two major goals that we need to work on and we need to achieve. The first one is to provide better and quicker cross-border healthcare for patients, no matter of their disease area, country of residence, or social status. And the second goal is to have better observation of patients' rights and collaboration between different member states. Next slide, please. Another important part of the historical background of the development of the cross-border healthcare is the inclusion of the patient's feedback. And as a major feedback of the patients about the directive is that it has the potential to improve the access and quality of healthcare if it's implemented in a patient-centered way by different member states. Also, another important feedback from patients is that they think that certain aspects of the directive could be built upon for long-term improvements, which means that we need stronger European cooperation on safety and quality and better implementation of the HTA and stronger European reference network. When we talk about patients' feedback about the implementation and development of cross-border healthcare, we need to take into consideration also the results from the EuroParometer survey about the cross-border healthcare. This survey actually provides patients' evaluation of the directive about cross-border and its implementation. And according to it, fewer than 2 out of 10 respondents felt well informed about their rights in cross-border healthcare. Only 1 in 10 respondents is aware of the existence of national contact points. And there are certain identified obstacles related to the directive as well. The first one is delayed in the implementation and development of the directive in the national law. Also, we have low awareness among European citizens for their healthcare rights, and a number of administrative requirements that deter patients and slow down the progress. Actually, all these obstacles are also challenges for the proper dissemination and understanding of the directive, and especially for the proper implementation of the cross-border healthcare in general. Next slide, please. And there are still a lot of challenges for patients when we want to have proper implementation and dissemination about the directive. The first one is the patient's rights. The original purpose of the directive was to identify legal rights of patients. However, based on the implementation to date, this goal hasn't been achieved yet. We also need to have equity of access. Equal access to healthcare and this kind of services is fundamental human right, which should be implemented in all forms of the healthcare services. Another challenge is the quality of the healthcare. High quality of healthcare should be provided to patients no matter of the geographical region, social status, and other social aspects that they have. And we also have the patient's empowerment. Patients need to know that they have the rights and they should receive equal opportunities to implement their rights and to have legal framework for violation. Another challenge is how to increase the information to patients. Equal access to reliable, trustworthy, and understandable information is a both right in itself and a fundamental prerequisite to exercise one's rights. And another challenge is also the dissemination of the national contact points and the opportunities for reimbursement. Regarding the national contact points, we need better dissemination in the society about their work and how we could reach them. Regarding the reimbursement, we need better opportunities for cross-border healthcare reimbursement and better implementation and incorporation in the national policies. These are only few challenges that patients face when they want to use cross-border healthcare or when they start to seek treatment abroad. But how the situation in cross-border healthcare regarding the rare diseases? Next slide, please. Rare disease patients are defined by many characteristics such as the need for diagnosis, treatment, and information seeking. And in many cases, they have needed to access health services which are outside of their countries of residence. As every patient, people living with rare diseases are also looking for early diagnosis, better and accessible treatment, and equal access to drugs when this is possible. The directive from 2011, European national patients have the right to seek planned health care in another European country. But how this could happen in reality? Next slide, please. There are a few challenges for patients living with rare diseases when they seek and want to receive cross-border healthcare. The first one is a lack of expertise on national level about the concrete rare condition. Diagnosis in rare diseases is very difficult and this might be a big issue for the cross-border healthcare. The second thing is better time planning. The process of diagnostics for patients with rare diseases is often very slow because of the specific nature of the condition. We also need better legislation of the prior authorization requirements. The healthcare for rare diseases is included in the basket of benefits in other European countries. We also need improvement of the social security regulation, better inclusion of rare diseases, and provision of better expertise for rare diseases on local and international level. There are also a few important requirements for cross-border healthcare for patients who are living already with rare diseases. Better requirements for clinical evaluation and scientific advice for patients with rare diseases on national level. We also need to increase awareness among the national authorities about the issues for cross-border healthcare and people living with rare conditions. We also need better clarification of the term undue delay and to increase awareness about the existence of the national contact points and better interaction with the already existing regulation. Also, we need to overcome the isolation of patients living with such conditions and to seek treatment abroad, to encourage them to seek treatment abroad and to help them to find their ways. These challenges and requirements prove the fact that people living with rare conditions face more challenges compared to other people, and we need the proper implementation of the directive and regulation in order to include rare diseases and to provide equal rights to all patients. Next slide, please. And when we talk about cross-border healthcare, we really need to be aware of the work of the national contact points and to know how to establish a collaboration with them. That's why it is very helpful to receive information from reliable sources. One of them could be the official webpage for publications of the European Union. There are different leaflets consisting information about the benefits of cross-border healthcare and the actual work of the national contact points. Here you can see also a screenshot of one of these leaflets. It is important to be aware of our rights when we are seeking treatment in another member state and to know where to find this kind of information. That's why the establishment of a special platform dedicated to this information might be also very helpful for patients who are trying to seek treatment abroad. Next slide, please. And finally, there are a few major conclusions that I would like to share and we need to take into consideration when we talk about the patient's perspective on cross-border healthcare. The first one is that the European Commission should coordinate initiatives to develop guidelines for information about the cross-border healthcare, national contact points, and patient involvement in all that. We also need patients to have an access to guidelines about quality and safety of healthcare services and how to implement cross-border healthcare in their specific health condition. The European Commission should help for the establishment and development of a platform which can provide updated and reliable information about cross-border healthcare to patients. Member states should cooperate with each other and to involve patients and healthcare professionals in the development and implementation of standards about safety and quality of healthcare. Also, there should be a better legislation and coordination between the healthcare institutions in different member states. We also need to overcome the health inequalities between different member states and to try to establish a united network of support between different member states. We need harmonization of methods about national contact points that should be developed between different member states and to implement that on national and international level. And finally, but definitely not at least, there is a need to establish a position of patients ombudsman who will be in charge of the monitoring of the patient's rights. These recommendations are very important in order to see the proper implementation of cross-border healthcare and to know that patients are included in this important process. And now, with all that being said, I would like to thank you all, and I'm really looking forward to your questions and the discussion.
Thank you, Jana, for your very extensive presentation on cross-border health directive and the challenges they are facing, in particular for rare diseases. I would propose that we move to the second part of our session, which is the reaction of our panelists to cross-border health and to what Jana said. I would propose that we start with you, Martin. I hope you've been able to join us in the meantime. You've been looking at European reference networks, and certainly you can give us a little bit an update of where we are there and giving the view of DG Santé on that topic. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you hear me okay. Do you hear me? Yes. Okay. Very good. I'm really pleased to be here, and I see my slides are coming up, so that's also very good. So I will be rather brief because I know there's a number of interesting speakers also after me. I will speak very briefly about the ongoing process of evaluation of the cross-border healthcare directive, and I will focus in particular on the European reference networks that are quite important part of the directive. Next slide, please. This is I will not repeat all the very good description of the legal framework provided already by Jana. So this is just, I mean, a slide showing the two main pillars currently enabling cross-border healthcare reimbursement of healthcare received in another member state. It's based on two pillars: coordination, regulation and coordination of social security schemes, and the directive on the application of patients' rights in cross-border healthcare. Next slide, please. The directive on patients' rights in cross-border healthcare entered into force 10 years ago in 2011, and it is structured along the following, pillars. Firstly, I mean, it codifies the case law of the European Court of Justice related to the patient mobility cases and reimbursement of healthcare in another member state. It provides harmonized minimum patient rights for cross-border healthcare. It sets out certain obligations on the member states to provide information to patients on their rights in cross-border healthcare, and also importantly, it includes the whole section on cooperation across the borders between the member states in the different healthcare areas, including the European reference networks for rare diseases. Next slide, please. So 10 years after the entry into force of the directive, we decided that it's the right time to look at the directive again and evaluate whether it is still fit for purpose and to what extent the objectives of the directive have been achieved in the meantime. So the evaluation is conducted in accordance with the Commission's better regulation principles. And the evaluation will assess some of the, some of the issues that are on this slide. So how the directive's objectives to facilitate access to safe and high-quality cross-border healthcare in another member state have been met. To what extent is the directive relevant for meeting patient needs in cross-border healthcare? To what extent the directive has promoted patient rights and cross-border cooperation between member states for benefit of EU citizens? We will be also looking, or we are already looking at the approaches implemented by the member states and how effectively these approaches are working, what barriers patients still face when seeking healthcare across borders. And again, important part of this evaluation is also looking at how the treatment and diagnosis of patients with rare and complex diseases have benefited from the support of the European reference networks facilitated by this directive. Next slide, please. So I will now zoom in a little bit on the issue of the European reference network. So this is a snapshot from our website, which shows the virtual map with all the healthcare centers that are currently participating in the system of the European reference networks across the EU. Some of them or most of them as full ERN members. Some of them, especially in the smaller member states, where no specialized center fulfilling all the strict criteria exists, they participate in the system as so-called affiliated partners. Next slide, please. So what are the ERNs? ERNs are networks of highly specialized healthcare providers across the member states dealing with patients with rare or low prevalence complex diseases. Currently, we have 24 networks in place dealing with different rare diseases. And these networks facilitate the clinical collaboration between the healthcare providers, for example, through teleconsultation tools, so through virtual panels discussing individual rare disease patient cases and helping those patients to get the right diagnosis or the right treatment. But there are also focal points, or there should be ideally the focal points for advanced cooperation on research and innovation on rare diseases, on education and training of professionals in this area, and on exchanges of best practices. This is the legal basis for the ERNs. I don't think we need to spend more time on this one. So next slide, please. So the ERNs were actually set up in 2017. So since 2017, we have these 24 networks in place. Now, 4 years later, we are coming to the stage where we need to show, and the ERNs need to demonstrate the added value that they provide. This is why there are different evaluation and monitoring processes currently being put in place. One of them is the evaluation of the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive that I just mentioned, including the provisions on ERNs. And this exercise is evaluating the policy and the legal framework. We will also next year start another exercise, and that's a periodic 5-year evaluation of it's more technical evaluation of performance of all the ERNs and their members. So 5 years after the setup of the system, we will be looking at the individual networks and their centers, whether they are still fulfilling all the criteria or whether there is a room for improvement. Next slide, please. So I'm going back to the evaluation of the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. These are some of the questions that we are currently, trying to answer in the course of the evaluation with regard to the ERN specifically. So how effective is the directive in supporting the diagnosis and treatment of patients with rare and complex diseases through ERNs? How effective is the directive in facilitating knowledge sharing on rare and complex diseases among health professionals in the EU? What has been the impact of the directive on the research and so on? So there is also a good number of questions on the ERNs. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Martin. I'm just conscious of time, Martin. If you could go to your key.
Okay. So I will probably conclude. So if you can go further with those slides, please. Yes. So the evaluation started in January this year. There was an open public consultation since between May and the end of July that just closed. We received 193 contributions from a wide range of stakeholders that we are currently analyzing, including the EuropaBio contribution that was mentioned previously. So we are currently in the process of assessing all these contributions. We will be soon publishing the factual report of the consultation, basically providing some statistical data extracted from the consultation. The whole evaluation process should be completed in the beginning of next year. So in the first half of 2020, we should have the final evaluation report. And on that basis, we will decide on what should be the next steps in terms of the policy on cross-border healthcare in the EU. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, for your quick update. For the sake of time, I'm going to move to the next speaker of our panel, Irina. Irina, in your role of Patient Access Director at Novartis at European level, you have certainly a few points you want to make and some examples you want to share with us of what can be done. I leave you the floor.
Thank you. With 3 cell and gene treatments for rare diseases launched in the last 3 years, Novartis is the leader in bringing breakthrough cell and gene treatments to patients in need. As leader in this cell and gene area, we are committed to ensure that our medicines are accessible to as many patients as possible, irrespective of where they come from. We are co-creating tailored access solutions with payers across Europe to achieve broader and faster access to our cell and gene treatments. This is a very tough and long journey, and it requires strong dedication to patients and a no patient left behind attitude. Being on this journey, we could already achieve many successes. For example, 90% of patients with inherited retinal disease in Western region Europe eligible for Novartis treatment have already full access to it. We are also supporting patients from countries where access to treatment is not possible due to missing infrastructure or due to missing reimbursement. A couple of tens of patients in different rare disease areas eligible for Novartis cell and gene treatments have been already treated successfully cross-border. Although we are committed to secure access to patients everywhere in the region Europe, there is still a missing framework for these patients to be treated fast. For example, a Greek patient with inherited retinal disease had to wait more than 1 year long to be treated abroad, while his vision has been worsening. To overcome the cross-border challenges, we need partners. Let me outline 3 most important challenges that we are facing. And I've noticed that these challenges resonates very well with what Jana Popova just shared with us. So the first challenge we see are the too long approval timelines for cross-border treatments. They should be kept. Second, the opaque process of acceptance or rejection of requests with no possibility of appeal in many countries. It should be open with patients' representatives included closely in these instances. And the third one, many hospitals discriminate against cross-border patients. Differentiated fees for European citizens should be banned. And that's why, please allow me to share our call for action. It would be very helpful if the EU institutions achieve a regulation to provide a pan-European budget for cross-border treatments to enable equal access to all patients. Until such a budget is available, let's optimize the cross-border process by capping the approval timelines. And let's eliminate discrimination against cross-border patients by adjusting the incentives for the treatment centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. I think we got your points very clearly. I'm going to move to the next panelist, who is Brieux Van Damme from INAMI. Of course, the payers have a very important role to play in that piece. And Brieux, if you could give us, your view on cross-border health and what you see in your practice in Belgium, and maybe some ideas of how we can do better in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Grimm. Well, I was listening, of course, to the presentation of Mrs. Popova very carefully. One of the challenges she rightfully identified was access, indeed, and that's typically still a competence of member states and national authorities that I am happy to be responsible for in Belgium. And so very briefly, and just to maybe zoom in one of the many evolutions that are very promising for patients, but quite challenging for payers, is one-shot therapies, where I think cross-border cooperation indeed has a huge potential. You know that Belgium, together with our Dutch and Luxembourgish colleagues, has taken the lead since 2015 in trying to put together systems whereby we try to share evidence. We're talking about often very rare diseases, so in order to have robust real-world evidence and improve scientific research and development, I think it is important that we try to pool patient register, for example, and that is only possible when you're talking to small member states like ours, if you indeed cooperate with other countries. Second, I think we took the lead in trying to put together a system whereby we mutually recognize HTA reports, at least for the clinical part of HTA reports. I believe that could have served as some inspiration for the regulation that is being discussed now at the European level. And why was that important? Well, we believe that by mutually recognizing our reports, HTA reports, the evaluations, we not only learn from each other and pool expertise in domains, medical domains that are more and more complex, and in some member states it is actually hard to find specialists given the degree of high tech and expertise it requires, but also because by mutually recognizing HTA reports, we can indeed offer quicker access to these therapies to patients. And thirdly, we believe as well that, and that was one of the main objectives of this Benelux initiative, which you may have heard of, and of this cross-border cooperation in terms of improving access to innovation for patients. Well, is that not only do we believe that for payers and having a sustainable budgetary path, it is better to negotiate together, but we also think for small companies, it could eventually lead to some smoother procedures whereby a company would only introduce one reimbursement dossiers instead of 5, 6, 7, 8, or potentially one day 27 or 28 or even more. So that's one aspect. The second is, and that is really focused more on the national level, is that I think it is our responsibilities as smaller markets, if we can call it that way, to indeed try to design those innovative market access schemes that will allow patients to have quicker access to innovation and could then potentially inspire systems on a larger level. I think I will keep it at this, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Brieux. We will certainly come back to you with some questions afterwards, because clearly the payer's role and how collaboration between countries. I would move and propose to move to you, Dirk, as medical affairs lead for rare disease international development advisor. You have certainly your view on what needs to be done from the scientific perspective too, and we know at EuropaBio, leading on the innovation side, that science can go sometimes quickly, and access, of course, sometimes doesn't go at the same pace. So we would be very happy if you could share your views, back maybe to Jana's presentation too.
Thank you, Bernard, and I will not repeat what various speakers have said, and sometimes with even very concrete and very tangible proposals, which I fully subscribe. But from a, I think it's important to understand why this revision of the cross-border healthcare is really an opportunity to improve care of rare disease patients. Because what we are witnessing for the moment is a period of really a scientifically extremely exciting period with tremendous scientific advancements in the understanding of some of the rare diseases, a lot of which have a genetic origin. And with the increased understanding of some of these rare diseases also comes the availability of some cell or gene-based therapies, with even more currently in development. So all of these developments, they really and truly offer perspective and even hope to patients. Right? And as we all know, and as was clearly shared in the presentation on the RNs, the knowledge of these rare diseases and the knowledge of the underlying pathophysiology and the knowledge of some of the existing or newly developed treatments is really concentrated on some really centers of excellence across Europe, a lot of which are working together in these European reference networks. And specifically for rare diseases, it's not only a question of having access to optimal treatment, it's also having access to optimal expertise. Because as we all know, some of these rare diseases, they're quickly progressing and time is often of the essence. And the sooner these patients get adequately diagnosed, the sooner these patients can be followed up by really the competent centers with adequate treatment and follow-up, the better it is for these patients, because often through an early diagnosis and a rapid intervention, we can stop or even limit the progression of the disease. So I think for us, it's really important that we review the cross-border healthcare with this in mind, with optimal care and follow-up of patients in mind. And I guess this is broader than securing access to these patients. It's also securing access to expertise and knowledge for optimal diagnosis, early diagnosis. And I think Jana really mentioned it there are some specific goals. And I think from a patient perspective, we should be mindful of those goals. Why is this revision important? What can it mean to patients? What can it mean to patients not only to secure access to optimal and adequate treatments, but also access to adequate expertise, timely diagnosis, so that we can limit the progression of some of these really debilitating diseases. So that's a reflection I'd like to bring to the group. For me, cross-border healthcare directive revision is broader than simply securing access to novel treatments, which are critical, but it's also access to expertise, which is equally critical for patients.
Thank you, Dirk, for your points, which are all well taken. I was looking at the questions that are coming, and most of them are around, the implementation. How do we make cross-border health happen? So I would suggest, because we were waiting for Mr. Sokol, that must be a bit delayed in his meeting, that we move to the interaction between the different panelists. And the question I would like to bring to the panelists is, to make cross-border successful, we need to implement. And I would really like to have from all of you, what are the 2 or 3 things we should do in order to make it happen in the countries, and where should we, focus in terms of implementation. Jana, you want to start maybe and react maybe to some of the comments you just heard from the panelists, and then I would ask every single panelist what his view are on that question.
Yes, thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be part of this wonderful panel discussion, because I have heard very carefully different points and perspectives, and I believe that this is very important, and these kind of events are also very important in order to really understand the essentials of cross-border healthcare. I totally agree with what Dirk said, that cross-border healthcare, of course, is not only about availability and accessibility, but also how we could do that in the best possible way and how we could really implement and taking into consideration the patient's perspective. And I have heard really great stories and proposals from Novartis as well, and from Brooke and Martin about the implementation of the directive and how this could really happen. So for me, really, the thing which is essential is access, but taking into consideration the patient's perspective and to really speed up the process, because time is essential when we talk about cross-border healthcare. And I agree, when we talk especially for rare diseases that are progressing very fast, time might be crucial, and we need to have this factor into consideration. And at the same time, we need to help to establish very good connection with healthcare professionals, because unfortunately in many European member states, healthcare professionals are still not aware, and they don't know how to actually represent the cross-border healthcare, and patients need to find this on their own, and sometimes this might be already too late. So for me, accessibility, taking into consideration the patient perspective and taking into consideration the time is crucial.
Jana, I would just like to bounce one of the questions I see in the chat, because it's an example that is given, and I'm just going to read it loud because I think we need to take real concrete live example. It's a question from Phil Pachter to everyone. Let us imagine a young child in Bulgaria suffering from a life-threatening rare disease. An advanced gene therapy is available in Germany. However, in Bulgaria, the Bulgarian Social Security Fund's basket of healthcare benefits doesn't include gene therapy as covered medical treatment. So regardless of the directive, regardless of the regulation, and regardless of ERNs, the Bulgarian child is stuck unless he can afford to pay for the advanced gene. So in those cases, what would be your recommendation, Jana?
Shall I start, because it is speaking about Bulgaria?
Yeah, that's why I picked up on you first, because it's the life example.
Yes, well, I agree with Mr. Pachter that unfortunately in this situation the child is stuck according to the legislation frame, because gene therapy unfortunately is not well developed. It is not included in the directive and regulation, and gene therapies in general are not in the scope of the cross-border healthcare. I know that in Bulgaria, this is something very new as information. I know that in Bulgaria, there are some insurance companies that are covering this kind of gene therapy treatment. And sometimes healthcare professionals direct patients to this kind of insurance companies to have this kind of insurance, and you will be able to implement the directive and regulation. But this is definitely not the solution. And that's why when we talk about the accessibility and the regulation and directive, we really need to take into consideration how it is implemented on local levels, because I really need to admit that, for example, in the areas where I live, in the countries where I live, the directive is still something like a very non-understandable thing, not very well known from pharmaceuticals and from doctors and from patients. So we need to have better implementation and dissemination for sure, but I'm sorry, I cannot provide a solution to this.
Thank you, Jana, for your answer. Martin, I will pick on you, because you've seen that Dirk made a point about expertise and access to expertise. You know that at EuropaBio, we are trying to see how we can best connect therapies with patients, because at the end, patients need to access to innovation. So you just mentioned, we are now 5 years on the ends, what do you see, as the next step that needs to be done in order that we connect those patients from the very start with the right specialist, and that they can have access as quickly as possible to those advanced treatments? What would be your main points on that?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting question. I will a little bit take the advantage of the fact that we are in the consultation phase. So now, I'm interested in listening to all of you, of the stakeholders and experts in the field, to come up with ideas. But also, and then we will definitely then make proposals for the next steps. But if I were to pick one particular area in the context of the European reference networks, I think what we need definitely is a better integration of the system of the ERNs with the national systems. I think we need to avoid this gap that may exist in some of the countries, that there is a collaboration at the European level between the highly specialized centers. But then the pathway for the patient from the local or regional level to the expertise that is available in this European network is very unclear sometimes, or even absent completely. So I think where the work definitely should focus, one of the areas should be on better integration of the ERNs and their better connection with what is happening at the national level. So clear referral pathways, clear referral systems, and clear national policy. So if I were to pick one, I mean, this would be the.
Thank you, Martin, for your input. We expected, to see those consultation results, because we believe the ERN structure needs to be potentialized fully. Of course, there is still, some gaps. We don't know. We're going to be working with you to make sure that this connection between patient and the scientist and the right specialist happen. Irina, any comment on your side? You've been very clear in your points, but I'm sure you have additional points to make.
Yes, first of all, it's a very good concrete question that demonstrates all the challenges we are facing with cross-border cell and gene treatments. I'm happy to share with you in a nutshell that we had several similar situations in the past, where we worked closely with the payers in the country and also with the treatment centers to make it possible for the patient to be treated. It's a very challenging road to have all these discussions. And again, let me emphasize the time factor, because the patients cannot wait longer. One important point I would like to add to my previous statement is how important the diagnostic support programs are in this situation. It depends a lot whether this patient, how early this patient is diagnosed. So it's critical to have this patient diagnosed as early as possible, and in parallel looking for solutions with the patients, looking for the framework for these patients to get treated. And again, coming to my key message, a separate budget available for such patients can be a solution in a longer term. And there is one example also I would like to finish my answer with. There is a country where cross-border requests are supported automatically, and it's Luxembourg. So if you have such a patient, there is no need to wait long, but there is a very fast acceptance. So that can be also an opportunity to look into, but again, we need a budget, pan-European budget to make it happen.
Thank you, Irina, for stressing your points. I will now move to Brieux. I'm sure you have certainly some additional points you want to make. We speak a lot about the processes sometimes that can take long, and one of your points was, in countries like Belgium, you have a responsibility to be innovative and work in collaboration with other countries. In which area would you, focus your activities when it comes to cross-border health specifically?
Okay. Well, I wanted to maybe come back on the previous question, if that's okay, because I think the idea, well, one, it's an important one, and two, it's a very complex one, and it's about, sort of the core values of our union, right? Solidarity, and to where does that go? I think the idea of Irina or Dr. Grossenbacher is to have a pan-European budget is definitely an interesting way to or potential solution to examine. I think it was one of the propositions as well made by the European Parliament in 2016. It is very complex, obviously. There's different important interests at stake. If we see how complex and how slow the process is for, you know, the HTA regulation, you can imagine, you know, if we want to move to some sort of embryonic system of pan-European reimbursement, how complex that will be. But I think it's definitely something we need to investigate further. And you know what they say, it's impossible until it's done. And that is also how the European project got to be. So I would indeed maybe if I were a politician, invest efforts indefinitely until that, you know, until we got one step closer. And you know, I'm only 37 years old, so maybe that's my naivety speaking here. But you know, allow me that illusion while I'm still relatively young. Two, I think it's a shared responsibility as well. So you know, we talk about you know, why do some countries have access and why do others not? And of course, not all innovative products are launched at the same time in every member state jointly. And so I think we could also try to, you know, in potentially a European biopharmaceutical pact, try to have some mutual engagement that the, you know, the gaming of the system, if I can put it that way, should maybe be a little less than it is today. And that would probably have as a consequence that all member states would probably have to accept that, you know, some price differentiation based on their GDP per capita and other parameters that are apart. This is a personal opinion, but I think it will have to come from all sides. And I don't believe it's the payer's responsibility alone, nor is it the public authorities alone that have to tackle this, but the industry and patient associations alike will have to be associated to a holistic solution, to use a way too often used word.
Thank you, Brio. Thank you for bringing up the values, because I think at the end, you know, speaking of European values, and we want to be strong on those. I think in our example, you know, rare diseases or cross-border health, we have a typical example where we can work on those values and make them happen. I think it's the oldest to find the ideas to make those happen. And the example we had on the Bulgarian child is a typical example. For the sake of time, maybe Kurt, if you want to add 1 or 2 points. I see that Mr. Sokol is joining, so I will give him the floor in a few seconds.
So I'm a little bit older than 37, but I still have dreams, and I still have also this naivete, although I'm older than 37. And I think what we all can and should agree upon is that also for rare disease patients there is a high unmet medical need. And personally, I cannot explain why a rare disease patient in Bulgaria would have so much later access to a breakthrough gene therapy than a patient living in Germany. Ethically and as a medic, I cannot explain it, and it's unexplainable. And to Brio's point, the principle of solidarity and equity for European citizens is probably an. I also agree with the one that there is joint stakeholders represented here in this. I think there are some proposals that have been shared. Be heard, for example, by Novartis. I think we should really have the. Okay, so I was saying that we should start from the principle of equity, saying that all European citizens deserve the same access to breakthrough treatments that have a meaningful or important impact on patients' lives. And it's a joint responsibility of all stakeholders here around the table to openly discuss, kind of get away from some dogmas that have been existing in the past. And I think that it's only by doing this, by tackling this in a very innovative way, that we will be able to address the issue. I think one important lesson, and I think as a Pfizer we have seen, with the mRNA vaccine, we have been able to break some dogmas. We have been able to break some traditional thinking, and it has resulted in an extremely quick access to a vaccine to European citizens. If we can take the same approach, if we can take the same philosophy, if we can take the same joint responsibility for offering these breakthrough treatments for patients who really need it. And again, time is of the essence. I think I have no doubt we will come to very creative and good solutions. And again, in the interest of patients, it's a joint responsibility. So let's do this together. Let's do it on the principle of solidarity, and let's especially do it with patients' interest in mind.
Thank you, Dirk, for your points, which I think are all well taken. I propose now that we have Mr. Sokol, MEB Sokol, who has joined us. We are running a little bit over time. So, Mr. Sokol, I know that you're a specialist in the cross-border health point. I don't know how much you followed from the discussion from the panelists just before, but could I ask you, briefly in 3-4 minutes to give your views on the topic and get, your key messages across to the audience? I'm sorry for that, but we're running, unfortunately, over time. If you can do it in a few minutes, that would be great. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I apologize for not being able to join you sooner, but we had a meeting on the report in the EPP on the report on the beating cancer, Europe's beating cancer. So we are finalizing our amendments, our party's position. So this was the reason why I wasn't able to join you earlier. So I'll try to be as brief as concrete as possible. So we know that. So I like to, when I speak about topics and issues, I don't like to speak in general terms. We should do this or that, but to focus on what we can do within the competences and powers which European Union has. And of course, we know that healthcare is primarily a national competence, a national power, but European Union has some really concrete instruments which can be used to provide and facilitate access to advanced therapies in other member states. Of course, first is the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. So this directive was adopted 10 years ago, but there are many problems with this. So it provides additional obstacles in terms of giving prior authorization, possibilities to get prior authorization for treatments abroad, additional obstacles which were not provided by the case law of the European Court of Justice, which preceded this directive. The directive is very complicated. The reimbursement rules are very complicated. People are not aware of the possibilities to access healthcare abroad, and they have actually two sets of reimbursement rules. One is in the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive, and the other is in the Social Security Coordination Regulation. So what I'm advocating for is first to actually merge these two sets of reimbursement rules and actually to move the reimbursement rules from the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive completely to the Social Security Coordination Regulation, and to leave only the rules on e-health, on health technology assessment, European reference networks, etc. in the directive, and to move everything about reimbursement into Social Security Coordination Regulation. Why? Because social regulation is a much stronger legal instrument than the directive, because it is directly applicable, so there is no national implementing legislation, so it will be much easier to actually implement this. And also Social Security Coordination actually gives you more possibilities and more favorable tariffs when compared to the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. So this is my first proposal. My second proposal is to get rid of the additional obstacles which are contained in the Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. And one of the most important obstacles is the fact that it is the national experts who in the end decide whether to give you prior authorization or not. And they decide whether to give you prior authorization or not, depending on the fact whether there is an adequate treatment available domestically. And in most cases, this is the treatment that they provide for them. They provide by themselves. So this is a conflict of interest waiting to happen. So my proposal is to grant patients the right to second opinion from abroad. We can use European reference networks for that, to actually hear independent experts to tell you which is the best possible and necessary and adequate treatment anywhere in the EU. I think this right to second opinion would very much facilitate access to healthcare abroad. So this was about Cross-Border Healthcare Directive. The second proposal is to adopt the rules on joint procurement, similar as we had for COVID-19 vaccines, because I believe that this can be used if we have a common negotiating positions about the pricing of advanced medicines and therapies, actually to reduce prices, which will be very beneficial for patients from less developed member states whose national healthcare systems cannot pay for the most expensive drugs which are available on the market. Third point, health data space. So one of the big problems if we want to conduct, for instance, cross-border healthcare, cross-border clinical trials, is that we do not have interoperability of data between different member states. So the Commission is currently working on the regulation in European health data space. This is something that I've been advocating for very strongly in the EU, because if we achieve interoperability of data across borders in different member states, this will very much facilitate for patients access especially to clinical trials, to cross-border research, etc. And in the end, also what I think is important is to actually use cohesion policy funds to invest into health infrastructure, but not just infrastructure, but also into health workforce as well. Why? Because you can have most advanced therapies and medicines available in your home country, but if you do not have experts who can provide actual treatment with this, then you don't have nothing. And of course, and I think that European Social Fund can be used to finance specializations, subspecializations, especially in those member states which are lacking workforce, where you have big outflow and emigration of health professionals to other member states, to relieve this problem and actually create expertise necessary in those member states that patients can access. So these are some of the concrete points that I wanted to make, which I think can be used to facilitate patients' access to most advanced therapies in the EU, both in other member states, but also at their own territory. And I think that EU can do a lot with concrete pieces of legislation to actually make this happen. And I will be working on this in the European Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MEP Sokol. These were very concrete items that we will take, and you can be assured that EuropaBio will work with you on those to make sure that we found those solutions. We were discussing a Bulgarian case before, and I think at the end, it's the patient that needs those treatments. I think we've seen through the discussion that has occurred that there are many very good ideas that should, change the paradigm there. Unfortunately, we do not have too much time to finalize the discussion, but I would like to thank all the panelists, all the speakers for that discussion. I'm sure, having heard the discussion that was going on, that EuropaBio will follow up on some of those ideas, and be assured that in our ATMP working group, we'll come back to you so that we can do contributions to this topic. And I'm happy that Mr. Sokol could join us, because as you have seen, he knows this topic in and out, and we believe, there is a clear implementation that needs to happen in line with the values we just mentioned, access to treatment and to new therapies. And of course, EuropaBio is there to make sure that we connect, the innovation with patient and making sure it happens. We are just sharing with you the Slido and the input we got through the Slido on the different barriers. Just for you to look at that. I will now close the session because we are running really over time, but thank you again for your contribution, and be assured that we will follow up on some of those ideas with you, and hopefully we will be able to interact on that topic a little bit further in the future and come and contribute as EuropaBio to some of those ideas. Thank you again for your time, and thank you for the questions, which were all driven on clear implementation of cross-border health. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very good rest of the day.